Welcome to the TrotCast Revolution, presented by Diamond Creek Farms, a cut above. I'm your host, Jay Hochstetler, and I am always joined by...
Always Ryan Macedonio. Jay, how you doing?
I'm good. How about you?
Good. Happy Rusev Day. How about that?
Every day is Rusev Day, in case anyone was wondering, but today is a particularly happy Rusev Day.
Yeah, I didn't know that it was Rusev Day, so happy Rusev Day to you, Jay, and happy Rusev Day to everybody.
Yeah, you missed out on the 12 days of Rusev during Christmas time.
Did I? Oh.
Yeah.
I'm kind of upset. I mean, listen, apparently every day is Rusev Day, so
we can always have 12 days of Rusev.
Sure. Why not? Let's have 12 days of Revolution, right?
Yeah, sure.
Or no. We don't want to step on Rusev. We don't want to step on Rusev.
No. He would probably break us in half, so
yeah,
definitely don't want to do that.
Let's stick to what we do best, and that's revolutionizing things. So how about we jump right into it, Jay? Do we have anything to discuss or do anything, whatever?
Let's revolutionize the hell out of something.
Okay, go for it. Go ahead. This is your baby.
All right, so if you've been following along, we talked about how if the idea of Bodie Miller dabbling in with training horses, and how he's going to kind of revolutionize some things. He's going to be more athletic-based, more Olympic mindset to it, and that how it will change the game. And I kind of thought about it. I was like, well, what if another famous person dabbled with training horses? And I thought of what about a super marketing mind would all of a sudden say, I want to train horses. So I thought of he's passed away, but what if Steve Jobs all of a sudden, if before he died, he said, I'm going to train harness horses. And I don't really know anything about training harness horses, but I know about running a business, and I know about making people want to buy my product. And so I just thought, well, let's just do a hypothetical. Let's pretend that a marketing genius like Steve Jobs is going to become a harness racing trainer. What's he going to do that's different from what's being done now?
I was a little confused at the idea because I thought we were talking about zombie Steve Jobs, but no, we're talking about Steve Jobs 15 years ago, 10 years ago, right? That's in the prime of his career. He decided, forget Apple. He's going to start training racehorses with no knowledge. So I like that idea. And I wrote down some time. Do you have an area where we want to explore this first, Jay?
I think I'll play off yours. I have a few things that I want to add, and I'll just kind of fill in if you have missed anything.
Okay. First thing, I wrote down a list of things that I thought that Steve Jobs did. Fantastic. And specifically to what Apple and the iPhone and all those things like that. I think one of the things that he would say is he wanted to make the iPhone and all of his Apple products visually stunning. I think those are two words to describe exactly what he wanted to do with his products and what you could do with those products, be visually stunning. I think we've proven in small bits here and there that we can make horses and harness racing look visually stunning. It's just that we only get them in little bits and pieces.
Yeah, I think one thing I've always read about Steve Jobs is he cared an irrational amount about just the process of opening one of his boxes. He wanted the process of opening one of his boxes to be an experience, and he designed it so people would have, when they opened it, it was kind of like a grand opening to see his product. So in that same mindset, if he was a trainer, he's going to have top of the line equipment that looks, it's his brand. You can see his colors, his name, stuff like that is going to be on the horse, on his grooms, on the trainer. Everything is going to be very obvious that it's Steve Jobs stable. That's blatantly obvious. Some trainers do this right now, but a lot don't. And it's something that I think is, if you're wanting to build a brand and build a business, it's ungodly important. You should have something that just makes you stand out. And that's what Steve Jobs did. Everything that he had between the boxes and the way his product looked and the way that he presented himself at the annual Apple showcasing, when he always had the black turtleneck and the logo. And everything was just, you knew, if you saw that, oh, that's Apple, that's Steve Jobs.
Yeah, there was branding involved, and I think that we could really learn something. More stables. I do a little bit with Team Millard. I see Jen Bongiorno is now starting up JB Racing and things like that, where it just, we need more of that. We need more collectively, more people just taking the time to showcase what exactly the visual product is. I mean, it's the horses, it's the people. Like you said, branding is a big deal. Everybody should always be wearing, you knew with black turtleneck, there was a lot of things like that. And I think Steve would, that would be the first thing that you can easily capitalize. It's not a lot of money. It's just a lot of effort. And he was a little bit nuts, but we've talked about this before. You got to be a little bit nuts to get to the top.
Yeah, if most of the people that are supremely good at whatever thing they dive into are kind of like borderline sociopaths. Like they just care an irrational amount about one thing, and they're kind of like tune everything else out and kind of freak out anybody else that would try to do what they attempt to do.
Now, here's one thing that I don't know specifically that Steve Jobs maybe did it, but I know that Eric Bischoff did it. And I know we're talking about Steve Jobs, but this was something that it has always stuck in my head. When Eric Bischoff took over, I don't know if you know who Eric Bischoff is. People who are watching at home, I know you do, Jay. But when he took over WCW from Turner Network, he basically went through everything and he just started saying, how do we make this more efficient? How do we save money a little bit? What do we do? I mean, there's been people that I think it was American Airlines took one less, they made their flight magazines one like millimeter thinner, and that saved themselves $1 million each year. So there's lots of little things in a stable that I think that we could save money on, trim the fat here and there. And it may seem like a little bit here, but I think that we just do stuff kind of, I don't think there's any real fine tuning in our industry, and especially the training side.
Yeah, it's kind of shocking how, if you really like sat down and thought about your stable, how much money you actually kind of end up wasting. Not because you're reckless per se, it's just kind of the way it happens. You don't think about like little stuff in terms of just like, oh, if I would have just had that stuff restitched instead of just buying all brand new stuff, and it would save you maybe a couple $100 at the end of the year. Well, if you did that to several other things, all of a sudden you're saving a couple of thousands of dollars. Now maybe instead of a $40,000 yearling, you're buying a $50,000 yearling, and maybe that one was a little higher quality, and next thing you know, you're winning more stake races and just building and building and building. Everything really adds up, and that's kind of the idea of Steve Jobs. Everything was small, and he realized every small thing was eventually become a big thing.
I would even wondered to say if people fully measured their feed, the food, the sawdust, the hay, the water, all of those things like that you actually cost money. Or even some of the liniments, some of the hoof grease. If you measured them out, instead of having a tub of hoof grease or a couple of bottles of spray liniment or things like that, what if you actually measured out and said, no, this is how much hoof grease you're using each day. And there's no waste. There's no things like that. This is how much hay we're getting. So we know how much there's no waste. And you figured out ways to not waste things. I think you'd save a lot of money. And you're employing efforts that just take effort. That's pretty much the bottom line of it.
Yeah, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, the idea of discipline. It's just a matter of discipline. And having discipline and stuff like this just leads to having more discipline and more success. There's no such thing as like too much discipline in terms of yourself, not necessarily talking about disciplining other people, just having goals and having a strategy and sticking to it religiously, which is what Steve Jobs did again.
Always be Mickey, just toying with the field.
Mickey is motoring home to a magnificent finale. What a race! Always be Mickey on the outside. Always be Mickey.
Heading down to the line. Always be Mickey in 146 world record.
One of the other things I have marked down is how he simplified things. I think he just went back to basics on a lot of things and even started over. I don't think he tried to keep building on a broken product. I think he realized when products were broken or when things had to be scrapped, and he was okay with simplifying things and going back to the beginning. I mean, the iPhone was something that he could have built off what other phones were doing, but no, he said, no, I'm not building off that. I'm going in a completely different direction. I'd be interested to see what training methods, what employee hiring techniques, how he runs his stable. We saw, I saw, got 300 comments. They were talking about the grooms and how I didn't fully read the article and things like that, but there's a bunch of different ways that labor force can be handled, simplify things instead of making things more complicated.
He always was, even if you just look at an iPhone compared to other phones, they're just much more, plain, and they can do amazing things. But if you just like holding it in your hand, it looks plainer than every other phone on the market. There's just less buttons, less colors, but it's all about kind of the aesthetic design of it. That's what he wanted, and people kind of enjoy that. I've always kind of steered my older folks towards Apple products just because they're super just simple. You can just click on anything. It's very self-explanatory. And this is kind of not what Steve Jobs might focus on, but I've just seen people like in harness racing that have 16 zillion pieces of equipment on a horse, and then another guy grabs the horse and he says, screw it. He goes, I'm taking all this off. And I'm breaking the horse down. It's usually an old racehorse. He knows how to race. He might not need all this stuff. And you'd be shocked how many times it works. And that whole concept of like, maybe I'm just way overthinking this and trying to make all the bells and whistles be on it when really I just need to focus on making sure this horse is fit, healthy, and in the right class. If you do those three things, you'll probably be a lot more successful than you think of. Instead of, I need to go buy those like top of the line shoes, and I need to put this type of equipment on them, and I should change feeds. And no, it's not that complicated all the time.
Well, and I think one thing that Steve, yes, it was simplified, but he also focused on something. And like you said, if you simplify things and you focus on what are my three things that I want to focus on, like you said, health, nutrition, and just, whatever the horse is. And listen, each trainer's different. Each trainer's going to have their own opinions on these things. But yeah, a lot of times we just watch the Prix d'Amérique. Most of those horses don't even race with an overcheck. Most of those horses, none of them race with trotting hobbles. None of them race with head poles. Now, Bjorn's horse was running in pretty savage on the last turn there, but still, the horse was fine, and he won the biggest race there is to win. So, hey, maybe maybe we're just getting too complicated. I'd also be interested to know, like, Bodie, he does downhill skiing and he does things like that. And you'd want to train things that are relatively in that ballpark. And I'd wonder if we're I don't want to say overtrain, but how we're training. It's like, okay, well, horse is going to race a mile. And I wonder if just multiplying that by 10 is the best way to go. Make it so that the races, we've talked about this, race is the easiest day, but instead of doing all this crazy stuff and you just augment what the horse is supposed to do, and that's keeping it as simple as possible.
He always wanted to kind of look at things that were in terms of like, he's simple but he's focused. And with a horse, it's almost like all this hard work. We will go to a horse to race, and that's his hardest race. Man, he's exhausted. Give him days off, and then we don't like work him hard in between. Where it's the same thing with like an iPhone. Like, he put years upon years into anything he designed and anything that he made, and it's kind of the same thing. You need to put like the foundation in terms of just training a horse, and it's all about like focusing on something so religiously. I haven't really like got what I want, but the way he would preparation, I guess, is what I'm looking for here. Is the preparation he would put into designing a product and designing a phone is the same thing into preparation of having a horse ready to actually race and win a race.
Do you think that he would spend a little bit more time with each horse? Like, one of the things that I think is pretty, I don't know if criminal is the right word, but we get these horses from a sale that is racing or a claimer, and we assume that, yeah, just throw them right back in. And it kind of bothers me that we don't allow horses to get settled into their environment, because how do we know that they're not stressed from the move? A horse goes to a sale and it's like, hey, here's your new home, buddy. Where however many hours you had to spend time. And then, oh, by the way, you got to go race. Now, maybe the horse has been doing that for years and he knows how to race, but we don't know that he's recovered fully from the stress of different horses. Like what if the horse doesn't like the horse in the stall next to him? Like, we don't know that they don't talk in the night. What if he doesn't like the bedding, the shavings, the food? I mean, he's changing his diet. If you ever change your diet, a lot of those things we just take for granted. Oh, yeah. So I wonder if Steve would buy a horse and kind of hold on to it for 6 weeks and say, no, we're going to give him a chance to accommodate and acclimate. And I'm going to learn about this horse instead of just, claim it, throw it right back in the box.
Yeah, it's truly amazing how many horses are able to just bounce from stable to stable and because they're just weekly claimers and they seem to do okay. Those horses are just incredible. I wish we could do like scientific research on them because their ability to maintain, with different diets, different surroundings, different methods, it just blows my mind how many horses are just fine with it. I guess they're born to run, as people say. That some of them just have that innate ability. Doesn't matter what's thrown at them. And with like giving a horse a lot of time, if Steve Jobs is a person like that, he would have the money to be able to do this. That's why most people just throw him right back in the box, is because the racing claimers, they need that short-term, quick turnaround money. Where maybe if you had a guy that could take a couple weeks and figure out what exactly this horse needs, like a Steve Jobs or somebody with a lot of like a Bodie Miller, and he could turn this horse. Maybe he claimed it for 30, but he figured out what he exactly needs, and now he's a 50 claimer when he brings him back. And those 6 weeks were worth it because he's already going to make a $20,000 profit if he's successful at the 50 claimer and somebody takes it off of him.
Well, that was one thing that I just thought interesting is a lot of these horses go from stable to stable and sale to sale and things like that, and it just makes me wonder. There's no possible way that they could be maximizing if you go from one claimer to the other, there's no possible way that horse that goes to that new claiming stable is maximized, right? Like there's from an athletic standpoint, because you don't have the research and the data to show how to maximize this horse, which makes me wonder if we ever have gotten the maximum potential out of these horses, which makes me wonder how good actually are the trainers involved. If you can go from stable to stable, and I'm not talking about, the drug trainers and things like that, I'm talking about actual athletic performance, is these horses go from stable to stable and it doesn't bother them? That doesn't make sense from an athletic standpoint, because if Steph Curry changed his diet from 1 week to the next and switch things, he wouldn't be where he is. That doesn't make sense, right? Am I explaining that right?
Yeah, I think that's why you see certain horses where they've been bouncing around, and then they hit one trainer and it just clicks. Like that was the program he needed. And that trainer all of a sudden makes him, that horse becomes an open horse. It happens more often than you think. And it wasn't, this guy's doing something different. It's like, no, like that was the match those two needed. Like that trainer and that horse were exactly what each other needed. And that's how it works. It happens all the time. It would be amazing to find out how many like yearlings that were bought that could have been a stakes champion. Mm-hmm. They just weren't in the right setup. There's probably a staggering amount each year that there was nothing like wrong with the horse. He just wasn't in the right program. And it's not necessarily the fault of the trainer. It's just that his program didn't match up to that horse. Mm-hmm. The same thing with NBA players. Some of them do terrible on some teams, and they go to another team and they're way better.
Yeah, it's almost like, and this actually, you're doing my job, Jay. The transition of, you have to build a culture, and that's what one of the things that Steve Jobs did. He built a culture of expecting innovation, and forget about the actual culture. You just need to build a culture, and I think probably, Tactor and Burke have really established a culture of what exactly what they are and what they're about. And that's why they're at the top, because they're consistent with the culture and what they're successful at. And, I don't know if Jimmy or Ron would ever admit that maybe they aren't good with a certain horse. Possibly. Maybe they don't care. But they also maybe are good enough to say, yeah, I'm not good with that type of horse, and I don't want that type of horse, which is maybe why they are successful, because they never had those bad horses in their stable and they never had those bad races.
Yeah, in terms of that whole kind of building a culture style thing, like Steve Jobs, like he was all about, like he created there was Apple people, like people that would only buy Apple products. He kind of created a like semi cult following of his, you are part of the Apple domain, and I think Jimmy Takter and Ron Burke, they both kind of have their brands, their culture, and that's part of part of it's training horses, and part of it's just people managing. Like owners like to go to Jimmy Takter because they know what they're getting. He obviously connects with them well, and the same thing with Ron Burke. Connected with Weaver and Buscemi, and they've taken off forever. If he would have had bad people skills and not connected with Weaver and Buscemi, who only knows where we would be at now in harness racing. And then that's why people like Steve Jobs succeed. They know how to reach people, whether it's millions of people or a handful of owners, and they know what they want and how to make them feel a part of a team, basically. If you're joining Team Takter, you're joining the Burke Brigade, and you're kind of proud to be an owner of them. And that gives, like, it's the same thing as like a rich guy buying a basketball team. He kind of wants to, play with an athletic event, even though he's maybe past his prime and old. So you kind of have to have that ability with horses and people to say, this is our program, this is our culture, and this is how you're going to succeed with it.
Yeah, I think if Steve had his own training stable, he would smack you in the face with his culture. With, again, whatever the culture is, if it's success, I think that's what kind of Takter emanate. Like, you want to win the Hambletonian, like that's culture. That's Takter's culture, and I'm other races too. But I think Steve Jobs would do an even better job of that and saying, no, these are our goals. This is what we're about. Forget about what happens on the track. This is what we're about too. This is what we do during a race, after a race, before the race. This is what I expect of my people, of my employees, of my horses. And whether it's fun or serious or travel or one racetrack, I think every owner would know, every owner, trainer, driver, caretaker would know what it's like to work for him. There'd be no confusion, what it's like to own, what he's like, in times of chaos and turmoil, in times of success. I think that's one thing that we really don't do a good job of, even though we kind of know. We could do a little bit better job of our culture branding.
Diamond Creek Farm presents Southwind Frank, a force of nature who tore through the 2-year-old ranks and left a lasting impression on everything in his path.
It's all Southwind Frank, 2.5 lengths in front. Southwind Frank wins the Breeders' Crown.
Southwind Frank is powering past on the outside. Southwind Frank wrapped up in the first Dancer division.
With the wind at your back, there's no limit to how far you can go. Southwind Frank, standing at Diamond Creek Farm.
And just this actually just kind of popped me off the top of my head. We're talking about the different cultures and different ideas of how we do things. And one thing that Steve Jobs is really good at, and Apple as a whole, is they didn't necessarily have to make something new. They took ideas from other people and made them better. Mm-hmm. Like there was the MP3 players, and Steve Jobs said, I'm going to make the iPod. It's exactly like an MP3, but I think people will like these things more because I've taken their ideas and I've tinkered them to be more user-friendly and things like that. Same thing with the iPhone. I mean, there were smartphones before the iPhone, but he said, well, I think they have good ideas here, but this company has good ideas. I'm going to take them all and just modify them and make them better. And a lot of people don't do that enough. It's not that hard to look around and say, man, Ron Burke and Jimmy Takter and Brian Brown and all these guys, they do this, this, and this. Maybe I should take a piece from Brian Brown and a piece from Ron Burke and a piece from Jimmy Takter and kind of combine that, and now I have my own stable, and it's a little piece from each part. Amazing how many people could probably improve themselves just by not finding something new, not finding a new horse or a new drug or whatever. It kind of taking a little piece of something that's already there and applying it with another piece of something that's already there. And that creates something new when you combine all those things together.
My last kind of note is he took everything and he created his own operating system. Mac OS is an alternate to Windows. And that was something, I don't exactly know what went into that, but you have to create your own operating system in any business. And it's just, that always has kind of spoken to me as, no, this is how I'm going to do things. And I'm aware of what I do, and I'm aware of what I do wrong. And I know what I could fix, but do I want to fix it? And I know where I'm going to take chances and take risks. And I wonder if people actually consider that when they're making their own decisions, or it's just something that they've unconsciously said, well, this is just how it's been done. And that right there strikes me as, I hate that this is how we always do it, because I'm always questioning things and getting under people's skins. And that's just how I feel. I don't like that's how it's always been done mentality.
Yeah, for sure. That kind of leads me into a little bit of another thing in terms of how it's always been done. It's always been kind of, everybody expects the tracks to create storylines, and nobody wants to create storylines themselves. Steve Jobs and Apple were very good at creating Mac versus PC, iPhone versus Android, and they wanted that rivalry. They did not shy away from it. They wanted you to say, oh man, I got to pick a side. I want to join this team, and I'm going to stick with them, and I'm going to be kind of herd mentality of, oh my God, I am all about Apple. They don't do this wrong. And that's kind of how you're going to attract people to your stable. The idea of what Steve Jobs would be really good at is he would be able to bring clients in, owners, better than everybody else. That's what he would be the best at. And you know what? Like, you can be there's lots of good trainers in the country, but lots of them are very good at just getting people to buy into them. They're good at attracting investors. And that has nothing to do really with what you do on a daily basis in the barn. It has a lot to do with how can you sell what you're doing in the barn, and how can you sell what you're going to put on the track. And it's insane how many people don't want to do that. They don't want to put themselves out on social media. They don't want to put an advertisement out or anything like that. They don't want a brand. That's all the stuff that he would do, and kind of put it against Jimmy Takter. He would say, no, Team Jobs. We do this better than Jimmy Takter. And you know what? You're going to find out on the track, but join us now or you're going to regret it.
I think that exactly. He wouldn't be scared to kind of, I don't know if attack's the right word, but go
butt
after,
heads. Yeah, he would butt heads with people.
And I would also have a private conversation with Takter or Burke and say, listen, I'm going to go after you a little bit, and tough shit. And in the end too, it's also going to put you in a position to come back at me and gain your own. So again, the Mac versus PC, Android versus iPhone, it forced people to pick a side. And it's not like iPhone versus Android. It's not like iPhone 1, the war's still going on. It's still PS4 versus Xbox. They made people pick sides, and it didn't kill PS4 or Android to go against iPhone and Xbox. It didn't kill them. So if we actually realize, like, okay, hey, if Steve Jobs went against Takter could also come back at him, and you could do your own thing. And I think we're scared to we like to tippy toe everywhere, and I don't want to say anything, and I don't want to hurt it. It doesn't matter. Like, your owners are like, if your owners are that fickle where they just go off, like, you're probably going to lose them over something stupid anyway. So create your culture, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, I mean, don't be afraid when the interview comes at the end of a race and you beat Jimmy Takter in the Canadian Trotting Classic, and all of a sudden it's, well, what was your horse, were you worried about this horse in the race? No. He goes, I'm confident in Team Jobs. I know what my staff can do. I know what the program can do, and I know what this horse can do, and I knew we were going to win today. And that's just a story. People are going to buy into that and be like, man, that guy has supreme confidence, and I'm going to have supreme confidence in him to train my horse.
I wonder if it's like a bad luck thing. They don't want to.
They're worried about karma.
Yeah, because I've had that too, where people don't want to do interviews before a race or after a race, and it's like if you're telling me that you spent weeks in a barn training this horse, doing all the elite stuff that you're supposedly doing, and then you're gonna let karma ruin your whole thing. No, have confidence in your horse. That's absurd to me that you would say, oh, I did all the right things, but karma's gonna get me. Like, to me, that's just a little foolish.
You know, and if the next week, like, you know, Jimmy Takter just rips your bridle off down the stretch and wins your race, lick your wounds and move on and say, you know what, we didn't have this week, but I'm confident in what we do, and I know that we'll be back in the next couple weeks and we're going to get this done.
Yeah. So overall, I think this was a fun episode because, you know, it's a hypothetical. It's fun, and
yeah, there's nobody like this in harness racing. There's nobody that would apply all the things we talked about.
But there could be
for a variety of reasons.
Why couldn't there be? Right?
Oh yeah.
Maybe all the young guns get on out there.
Yeah. Just don't be afraid to stir some shit. Yeah. It's all right.
So is there anything before we put a bow on this episode, Jay?
No, I think we'll just tell everybody where to find us, and we're good to go.
Okay, so I'm Ryan Macedonio. Make sure everything's on TrotCast, at TrotCast. Go back and watch all the Revolution episodes. Jay, our other show, #Harness My Take, that's debuting too, so make sure you go and watch that with the broski, and take us away, Jay.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Again, you're going to want to watch #Harness My Take. It's a good time. It's kind of similar to this, but we touch on a lot of topics and just have a lot of fun with it. And I really think it's going to be something anybody that listens to this will love. So again, thanks for listening. I'm Jay Hochstetler. You can find me on Twitter @JDHarness, and join the revolution.